Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'd like to call the Door County Board of Supervisors to order on Tuesday, January 22nd at 10 a.m. Roll call, please. I'm sorry. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. We have 20 present, 1 absent. Presentation of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Correspondence. There was a number of correspondence in your packet. Also the unassigned fund balance. Any comments on the unassigned fund balance or correspondence received? Public comment. We'll now open the floor for public comment. Public comment will be limited to a period of 30 minutes maximum. Any one speaker is limited to 3 minutes. If you're here representing a group, we'd ask that one individual speak for the group rather than everybody in the group. If somebody wants to speak a second time, we'll allow that after everybody else has had the chance to speak the first time. So if you'd like to speak, please approach one of the microphones in the back.
Good morning. My name is Robert Segers and I live on the Mill Pond. Let's have a look at the Forestville Mill Pond report dated June 6, 1996, 22 years ago, prepared by Door County Soil and Water Conservation Department. In the executive summary it says, and I quote, "Cropped farmland, approximately 60% of the watershed, are largely responsible for the nutrients and sediment delivered to the mill pond. Water quality problems in the watershed has made the Ennepe River a high priority in the Wisconsin non-point source pollution abatement priority watershed program selection process. Controlling agriculture non-point sources of pollution is considered a management option and is likely to have a long-term impact on improving water quality. Fast forward 22 years and looking at the June 2018 Forestville Mill Pond report prepared by the same department, I quote from the executive summary, "An analysis of the land use as well as computer modeling of sediment and nutrient loads highlights the primary driver of pollutant loading as agricultural sources." Ladies and gentlemen, the mill pond is not dying, it's being killed. The problem has been studied, and the studies have been studied again and again, and now we have another study coming up. It's looking more and more like the operation is a success, but the patient is dead scenario. The Soil and Water Conservation Department has known the pollution source for over 20 years. We are not the polluters, yet we are penalized by a recommended cheap option that does nothing about the source of the problem, turns backyards into muck holes, and comes with safety risk and odors according to its report. Would you vote go ahead if it was your backyard? Why not let the polluters pay for the cleanup? You cannot help but wonder how much thought went into the recommended 2-year drawdown and its impact. The public was never informed about the 2-year option until last December. Moreover, the fact that the pond is the crucial filling point for fire trucks of several neighboring communities was completely overlooked and brought to the attention of the county in a letter from fire department officials. Another interesting point is that the only option that does actually something about the cause of the problem, option 4, which is reduce agricultural runoff, lists under the cons of pros and cons, long-term benefits not immediately perceived. Really? It was perceived in the 96 report. Let us talk about options that do not destroy the recreational joy of thousands, do not wipe out an ecosystems for years to come, do not cost property owners millions of dollars in lost property value, where was the disclosure, and send pollutants downstream to our neighbors in an already impaired Anapee River, further polluting Algoma beaches and Lake Michigan.
Okay, I'm sorry,
We believe
your
there
time
are
is up.
options or combinations of options
Excuse me, your time is
that
up.
are not part of the 10 in the report.
Excuse
Think
me, your
out
time
of
is
the
up,
box
sir.
and involve impacted
Sir?
people. Door County gives
Sir,
us an
I'm sorry, your time is
environmental
up.
exceptional options like dredging. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I'm Terry McNulty at 300 East Park Street, Forestville, Village President of Forestville. And I have prepared some notes here that I want to make sure I get through. First of all, Mr. Chairman, and to this board, you should be embarrassed about how the citizens here have been handled. At the public hearing, we were told to stop whining. At the last meeting, we were told before the meeting even started, you've heard it all. Well, this is not welcoming or respectful or as part of the values that you post on your website. I mean, look at these people. They bought the land as an investment or to build their retirement homes, and this drawdown is going to do nothing to help them. The ecology, once reported, was 64 acres, and now it's 93 or 94. So it's growing. It's not dying. Talk to these people, listen to them, and have an opportunity to you have an opportunity now not to make a bad decision. I looked at the resolution in front of you today, the pond again, and it's misleading. It doesn't tell you the 10 options that were presented in this report, or what the popular options were. In fact, taking out the dam was one of the least popular options, and the drawdown is right there with it. The committee said you were told to do something, but that also is flawed because you're relying on information where 33% of the people that answered the questionnaire didn't even know what Mill Pond was, and then there was 11% that didn't answer at all. The people here are telling you something has to be done, but that's why the reason we feel we haven't been listened to, and this is a flawed plan. Facts from Soil and Water to the cause and provide that cause wasn't under control. And in the end, it stated our pond is unlike many shallow ponds across the state. It really makes no sense to do anything now until the cause is corrected. That shouldn't be hard to see, but it takes you not to be blind. Another flaw in this plan is that even if the pond was emptied, like thinking of it as a bowl, there's contours of the land underneath that pond, and on the west edge where it's 6 feet deep, those areas won't drain, and it leaves stagnant water and dying fish. You haven't heard this before. And this is the picture of what I was given after last Thursday's meeting of what's considered a success. Here in this area, the game's almost 2 feet. But as I responded, it's awfully green. That's not a pond anymore. That's not what these people have paid their money for and are paying taxes for. And that will change too. I've also heard a few times in passing, return this to a natural state. Well, I don't think people actually understand what the natural state of Forestville is. I think I've sent that to you in a letter. We were Forestville because it was a great forest at one time.
Terry, your
Not a
time
great
is up.
marsh.
Sorry, your time is up. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Laura Jorgensen. I am a trustee of the Village of Forestville, also a board member for the Clean Water Action Council and one of the founding members of the Friends of Forestville Dam. I actually handed out a packet that each of you received this morning, and it includes a couple of diagrams of the actual construction of the dam, which was kept out of the final report that you received from Soil and Water, and it also includes a page from the Mill Pond, of the dam inspection from October, which actually shows that the sluice gate, which is the most imperative part of this entire operation that is being proposed, was never inspected or part of the inspection. As a representative of the Village of Forestville and the stakeholders, I was also on the stakeholders group. I was the one that was elected to be on the stakeholders group, so I was at all of the meetings. for the Land Conservation and Parks Department. After a thorough investigation of all the information that was provided, I do not feel as though a 2-year drawdown is an effective, safe, or long-term solution for the current contamination issues in the mill pond. So on behalf of all of the Village of Forestville, the Friends of Forestville Dam, Clean Water Action Council, I would urge the supervisors to vote no or make a motion to table the proposed 2-year drawdown for the mill pond. I don't think we're ready to make that decision quite yet. In the packet information, if you're not familiar with the way that the dam is constructed, the water goes over the dam, but the sluice valve is actually what we're talking about opening here, which is actually located 7 feet below the water. And it's right about the same level as what all of this all the suspended solids and all of this muck and sediment is at. So when I asked multiple times in these stakeholders meeting if the silt would be flushed or the contaminants would be flushed downstream, I was told no, there wasn't a big danger of that. I don't see evidence of that being true. In fact, if you look at the International Hydrology Association, that's one of the key things that they do to flush sediment and to move it out of flowages and mill ponds and anything above dams is to move the sediment downstream. They use the same exact style technique, a drawdown. There are a lot of safety concerns, and from the village's standpoint, that is, with the fire department, that is a huge safety concern. Delay in emergency services because the fill site will not be available anymore for the fire departments is a great danger for our entire community. Obviously, the threat of blastomycosis, if you're not familiar with this, it's a fungal infection of the lungs, which is caused from muck that dries out and it's made airborne. Obviously invasive species, and also the fish population. One of the things that in the meeting...
Sorry, your time is up, but thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Don Fricks, 8305 Quarterline Road, Fish Creek. I'm asking for somebody to amend the minutes from the last meeting. The draft minutes don't show one thing about what I said during public comment. The main point I made is requesting the county board to enact a resolution expressing no confidence in our first assembly representative, Joel Kitchens. And I'll leave that there, and you can go back to Mr. Chapman's video to see that. And we've been told that, and we've seen a recent example in the cannabis referendum question that somebody complained that nobody was here, only one person was here to speak in favor of having a referendum on cannabis. And now we had 12 people want to speak at the last joint meeting. And, Mr. McNulty referred to some of the behavior there that we didn't feel welcome. And then Mr. Pabish suggested to me at a legislative committee meeting to call a chairman of a committee if I want to get on the agenda. Well, I called the chairman of a committee and asked if I could just get a point of information of who is asking for immediate action after 20 years of neglect on the mill pond, and was told that it's my policy to not talk about county business over the phone. Now that's 3 people in this room I could name, but I'm not going to, that have that kind of attitude when asking questions. So I think that's disrespectful of the public. You want us here to talk, but we don't get listened to. So anyway, I'm repeating the request for a resolution, of notes expressing no confidence in our first assembly representative. And he illustrated part of that yesterday as chair of the Assembly Committee on the Environment, has nothing on his calendar. Calling into the local radio station yesterday, he said that the supporting the DNR in their ability to regulate big industrial farm here, that is now going to the state Supreme Court on 2 different cases. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't look at resolution. We can't come up with a comment. There's nothing we can do about it. So I don't think that when we have a representative who's chairing the committee who's involved with most of what we're talking about here today says something like that on public. Let's see, on the Menominee Nation, and another topic is filing an appeal on their last court decision was not in their favor on the Akia mine on the Menominee
Don, your
River.
time is up. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Okay. There you go.
Good morning. My name is Dick Swanson, and I'm a resident of the city of Algoma. I lived down there for about 6 years. I've been water testing in Kewaunee County for that period and have spent a lot of time on the Anape River. A lot of time. I did that because of this. This is a photograph that was taken of our beach. I'll pass this around, okay? There's also several more I would love for you to look at of what comes down that river. The dam isn't the problem. It's never been the problem. It's what's upstream. It's what you're allowing to be put on and spread everywhere in that agricultural land. You can stop this. We can clean this river up, and it won't cost the taxpayers a dime. I repeat, not one dime. The polluters are doing this because they keep making manure. They make more every day, and they're running out of land. They will get all the animals they ask for. They will get all the water they need, high-capacity wells. What they do not have is enough good, spreadable land. And it's a little unfortunate for you that Southern Door has some of the best land around for spreading manure, liquid manure. You've got plenty of soil, and water table is deep. Northern Door, we all know the problem. Northern Kewaunee County, same problem. That's why our trucks are moving up here. They're moving up here because you allowed it to happen. You're taking the money and sending the poisons, the biologicals, the pharmaceuticals, the pollutants, the phosphorus, the nitrates, and who knows what else is in those pits, is being put on your land. You can stop this. You need to make a decision. And it's not about just money. It's not about their bottom line. It's about all of us. We need the water. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else that hasn't been up yet?
Hi, my name is Adam Urban. I'm from the town of Union. I, largely have no stake in the Mill Pond area. I just addressed this issue because I think that it's a very nice recreational area that's up here. And with all of what they're talking about with the water quality pollutants and the causes and this and that, I mean, this decision is based on what's good for the dam, what's good for the flowage, correct? So if we're just going to base it on this decision, I mean, to move these sediments downstream, the plan as it is basically just going to have the river excavate itself, and which is not a good idea for the health of the rest of the watershed. And to dredge these materials out is not going to be that much more costly. They can be reintroduced to the fields around. I just ask you all to be pragmatic and find other solutions, and don't make hasty decisions. Please just table the issue and take more interest into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name's Ed Bellin. I live at 7960 West Cedar Drive. I live on the west bank of the Mill Pond. My wife and I just moved there 4 years ago with our kids because of the pond. We fish it every day, pretty much. That's what my boys love to do. They're 4 and 6, and you draw it down for 2 years. I asked the question at a meeting, who's going to fill it back up with fish? I've been told we'll work with the DNR. It takes about 5 years for it to be able to be fished again. Now you want to draw it down every 5 to 10 years. Tell me the DNR is going to put fish back in there. Tell me I'm going to be able to fish it year after year. Everybody who else lives on there pretty much is retired and loves to fish it also. We're not going to be able to fish it anymore. It's going to be dead for that. It's not going to be what you think it is. I fought overseas for my government. Now I'm just asking for my government to fight for me one time. That's all.
Thank you. Anybody else for the first time? No.
And no introduction needed. So to get back to what I was saying, that the Anape River and Lake Michigan are both currently on the EPA impaired waters list. The flushing of contaminants would contribute to promote toxic algae growth along the shorelines, as well as dead zones like Dick presented to you at Crescent Beach in Algoma. No one from Kewaunee County, the city of Algoma, or the town of Anape was made aware or given the opportunity to be part of the stakeholders group that I was on. They are obviously stakeholders in this, if we're pulling the plug and letting it all flush downstream. They're also spending a lot of money on different testing down there as well. So I think the lack of collaboration could easily result in serious liability for the county. Actually included in the packet I gave you was a letter from the mayor of Algoma, Mayor Schmidt, asking for you to table this so that we can work together to find a better solution. Also, in my packet was a letter from Corey Koshart, who is a county representative from Kewaunee County, and he's also a supervisor for the town of Lincoln, which was the heaviest hit in Kewaunee County as far as the well contamination. So he knows a lot about manure and what it can do. There were no comparisons from other drawdowns given to us that support favorable results. In fact, the other areas, such as in Racine County, where the Fox River goes through, the DNR has actually discontinued drawdowns due to the negative impact on the wildlife and fish populations, and also the sediment flushing and contaminant flushing. Other cleanup options, such as dredging, were eliminated very early on during this process. No formal estimates were actually presented from any companies who actually do legitimate dredging work. So my question is with our county being surrounded by water, why hasn't the county looked into investing dredging equipment to be used for multiple cleanup projects? We've already done several dredging cleanup projects in our county, so the equipment would have paid for itself 10 times over already. And also it would be available for maintenance dredging down the road, which would be a very low cost then to be able to mitigate the contaminants and also dispose of them properly. Agricultural runoff was the main contributor, pointed out in both of the mill pond reports. And when the public was surveyed as to what their perception of the issue was on the mill pond, agricultural runoff was not given as one of the predetermined multiple choice responses. Seems a little skewed to me. Also, at the public meeting in December at the Town Hall Maplewood, concerned citizens were told on several occasions not to get into a big speech about manure or farm runoff, and were instructed to only ask questions about the mill pond and the dam. It's obvious that agricultural runoff is the white elephant in the room here, and no one is willing to address it or hold anybody accountable. So I see it as a lack of public education on the source of the contamination, and that's created a lot of confusion and lack of interest from people. My proposal is, again, to table this or vote no to it so we can work on a better solution together with a stakeholders group that actually involves stakeholders from who actually does have interest in this, including Kewaunee County.
Okay.
And they're willing.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry McNulty again. I'd like to finish. We ended on ending up with a great marsh, but that's just a temporary solution. It's just a matter of years till that would be a saturated area also. So it would not be the natural state of Forestville. I'm here representing what I think would be best for Forestville. And there's businesses there in Forestville I've talked to. They're on that petition. Their names are on those petitions. And you can't discount that petition just because somebody's from Hawaii. I think you don't know that Larry Hurd's grandson lives in Hawaii. One of our residents here today, his son has a friend. She's from the area, lives in Hawaii. So don't discredit that, because it's got people from outside the area. This is Door County, where people come from all over. So in my letter, I also stated there's the economic impact on Forestville. If those guests come here for their great fishing and it's not there again, do you think they're really going to come back? To me, the right thing to do actually now is to do nothing, as unpopular as that is, because nothing's really been proven to be taken care of upstream. And at least send this back to committee with direction to find funding. They seem to have been able to find funding for other projects that they want to do. And as you'll see later on in your agenda here today, there was plenty of funding for other projects. And one was even done in Sebastopol area that we talked about. And because that's a natural waterway, you're able to find funding for it again. But I don't think your departments were ever directed to actually try to find funding to actually really correct this issue. And dredging is probably the best option. Look at your reports of what was popular and what will take care of the issue. But it's just, again, a temporary fix. So to me, the best option is to do nothing right now, but at least table it and send it back to committee and ask them to find a way to fund this to correct the problem in Forestville. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don Fricks again. I'm sorry I didn't hear the 3 minutes on the first attempt here. Following up, another issue that the county has addressed before, besides the Menominee tribal problem with the proposed mine on the Marinette River, which has the possibility of, totally killing the Bay of Green Bay and Lake Michigan and ruining every bit of tourist traffic for this county. We did that once. We approved a resolution against the mine. It's time to do it again. Mr. Pavish pointed out to me that we already did a resolution requesting nonpartisan redistricting at the state level. It's time to do it again. It didn't work the first time. Now we have new statewide leadership, and it's time to do it again and maybe be a little more forceful with our local representatives. So thank you for letting me finish up.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Adam Urban, once again. I just want to say, it's hard to come up with solutions that are going to work for farmers, that are going to work for everybody involved. And, I know that the Soil and Water and DNR is, making strides to increase, water quality. But I also know that, we are overproducing. And these effects have effects downstream. And there is no other thing like the Forestville Dam on our waterways that is entrapping that much sediment from reaching downstream. So it's a very effective ways of mitigating a problem that we all perceive. Well, maybe there is no long-term solution that's right at hand that we can grasp. Sometimes maintenance, sometimes commitment to the maintenance of these barriers is worth it. And I just think that we should take time to really explore what we can do with it. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I'll now close public comment. Thank you, everyone. Is there any supervisor's response? I'm sorry, Megan.
I just want to express my gratitude not only for our Soil and Water Department for the work that they've done on this issue, and I think there's probably still more work to be done, but also to the public. It's not easy to bring together the information that they've brought forth, and I find it very refreshing to have so many people involved in the government process. Thanks.
Approval of minutes of December 18, 2018 regular meeting.
So moved. Second.
Second. Changes, additions, deletions?
I would like to have included Don Fricks's statement that he stated earlier today, that he also stated back in December, to be added to the minutes. Instead of the section that says messaging, disapproving of messaging in the December meeting minutes, to include his statement, which I can read off, or feel free to move forward. But to enact a resolution expressing no confidence in our first Assembly representative because of his votes on the December 2018 lame dunk legislation. I feel that a version of that should be stated in the minutes versus messaging because it can be misunderstood what messaging means. Thank you.
Specifically, what would you like to be put in the minutes?
That Don Fricks asked the board to enact a resolution expressing no confidence in our first Assembly representative because of his votes on the December 2018 lame duck legislation. So that he asked for the resolution versus the comment that's made about messaging. Thank you.
Anybody else? So all in favor of the minutes with the change as requested by Vinnie? So voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Pending business updates. Resolutions. Resolution 2019-1, requesting increased funding and oversight reforms for Wisconsin's Child Protective Services system. Helen.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Door County Board of Supervisors does hereby request that the state of Wisconsin increase the children and family aids allocation to counties in the 2019-21 state biennial budget by $30 million annually in order to cover a greater share of out-of-home care costs and increase staffing levels needed to meet the growing workload so Wisconsin's CPS system can meet its obligations. Wisconsin has a system whereas the counties provide the staff and the money in their budgets to support child protective services, and then the state then goes ahead and supervises those. We have had a real increase in the state due primarily to the increase in heroin, but most of all to the increase in methamphetamines. And we have a large increase in the state, particularly northern and western counties, in which Child Protective Services has been really stretched to the limit. We do not have any additional money in the budget, so a lot of the money has been coming out of tax levy. We also, this puts a real strain on Child Protective Service workers. Sometimes people want to know why there's turnover in human services, why staff don't stay a long time. There's a very good article attached, which I suggest everybody read. It explains a lot about what's happening. Maybe you don't think that there is meth in the county, but there is. It's coming up basically from south. It is not being locally produced like it used to be in its first or second runarounds. And it is extremely difficult to treat, so it puts a lot of stress on the treatment part of human services, and it puts a lot of stress on the young parents frequently having, or younger people that frequently use meth, extremely difficult. It's easy to use, easy to get a hold of, fairly cheap, very hard to treat. Unfortunately, there are a lot of younger children involved, and those children fall to the county to protect. So I'm just asking your support in sending this forward to the state.
Are you making the motion to approve?
I am making the motion.
I'll second it.
Any other discussion, questions, comments? Megan?
I'll just add to this that this was one of the 4 topics that Supervisor Boltman and Champo and I spoke to both Kitchens and Jack about last week when we were in Madison for the County Ambassador Program.
Anybody else? Not by voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolution 2019-02, committee appointments. CCS, CCST, Coordinating Committee, Highway Safety Commission, Land Information Council, Communication Advisory Technical Subcommittee, CATS.
Sure, you want to do a motion first or explain it?
Okay, I'll make the motion to approve.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Sure, so these are just our standard appointments. If you look on page 18 in your packet, that's behind the resolution. It just gives a brief letter outlining our appointments and the reasoning behind them. Again, 2 of those are related to, Tammy being our new sheriff and replacing the previous Sheriff Deloro on his seats, and then also vacancies for the CCS-CST Coordinating Committee and also the Land Information Council. Again, you'll see individuals that were reappointed, and if they're new members, we have a brief bio included for background.
Any questions? If not, by voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolution 2019-03, Forestville Dam and Mill Pond Management. We'll start with Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2019-03, the Forestville Dam and Mill Pond Management.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Discussion, overview?
Aaron does have a little presentation. Mr. Barrett, if you'd like to have it.
Yes, please.
So I do have, did ask Aaron just to provide a brief overview, because I know it's gone through several public meetings and gone through the 2 committees, but I thought it would be good just to give background to the full county board. So I asked her just to put a brief, presentation that we'll go over, and if there's obviously questions, we can definitely cover those, but I thought this would be at least a nice presentation to bring the entire county board up to the same level of understanding.
Good morning.
Good morning. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the concerns that were raised during the public comment. And my purpose of speaking with you today is to explain the process and the rationale behind our recommendation. And second, to respond to some of the frequently asked questions that you have heard. I want to make sure that you have some accurate information as you make your decision today. So first, how did we get here? As you heard, we've been here before. In 1996, Soil and Water prepared an assessment of conditions in the Forestville Mill Pond and recommended a drawdown that ultimately did not occur. We have made strides in some areas since that time and worked with many agricultural producers in the watershed since 1996, but the dam hasn't been operated specifically to deal with the mill pond conditions since then. There was one partial drawdown completed in the early 2000s for repairs, but that is not a good indication of what we're proposing today. Fast forward to 2016, Greg Colthurst from our office attended a meeting of the Airport and Parks Committee at the town of Forestville Hall, or at the Forestville Town Hall, and reviewed the data that we had from 1996, the management options, and we heard public comment at that time. Following out of that, we identified a need to update the conditions data that we have for the mill pond, and we did just that. Soil and Water received grant funding from the state in order to complete an updated assessment of the mill pond conditions, and we completed that report in 2018 in June. And a link to that report was included in the agenda packet, and I hope you've had opportunity to look at that. It's available online as well. In June, when we met with the Joint Facilities and Parks and LCC committees, we also advised them of the next steps that we were going to take to review the management options. One part of that was holding stakeholder meetings that you heard referred to earlier this morning. We had 3 in August and September of 2018, and the purpose of the group was to vet the management options that are included in the report. We also had the dam inspection. The Facilities and Parks completed the dam inspection last fall in October of 2018. And we met, you can see, 4 times as the joint LCC and Facilities and Parks committees about this topic. In December, we presented our recommendation to draw down and refill the mill pond after 2 years. We had a public meeting at the town hall. It was a joint committee meeting where we presented that same information, the updated conditions and the management option recommendation from Soil and Water, and took question and answer from the public at that time. We met just a couple of weeks ago, again as the joint committees, to advance the resolution that you have before you today. So, let me catch up. Here's a list of the people who participated in the stakeholder group and those technical professionals that provided input as we were evaluating the management options. I apologize if you can't read it in the back, but the list is available here. I'd like to thank each of the people who participated for their time and the effort that they put into helping us identify a management option for the Forestville Dam. Again, the purpose was to vet the management options, to evaluate the pros and cons and feasibility of each one, to help in developing a recommendation. It was a fact-finding mission that drew on the technical professionals that are listed on the right to answer questions about the different management options. It was designed to investigate and bring information back to the joint committees so that that information could help in making a decision. It wasn't intended that the stakeholder group would identify the solution. So there were a range of management options that were identified in 1996, and we again revisited those as part of this update. Not all were vetted by the stakeholder group. Those above the blue line you can see on the screen were removed from consideration fairly early in the process. The first is do nothing. We feel that this would not help improve conditions in the mill pond and that conditions would continue to deteriorate. Intensive educational effort. Education has been and always will be a component of soil and water efforts, and this alone is not a solution to what exists there. It's a component that can be used as part of a management option. Reduce agricultural runoff. This is the primary responsibility of our department and one we take very seriously. It's critical for us to keep up those efforts, but those alone are not going to deal with the sediments that are currently in the impoundment. Harvest aquatic vegetation. We identified that it wasn't feasible to control nuisance plants in a 94-acre mill pond by hand, and we had other options that would be available that would more effectively deal with this issue. Winter season drawdown was the next one. This would only address the aquatic plants through the freezing and not address shallow depths that are also a concern within the mill pond. And the effectiveness of this management option really depends on having a deep frost and dewatering of the sediments, which may not occur if you have heavy snow or mild rainy winters. Development of a lake management district or voluntary lake association. Again, this isn't something that would provide immediate benefits to the mill pond, but similar to reducing agricultural runoff, this is a long-term option that can be combined with another management option. So those options that are below the blue line, the four that you see there, were considered more thoroughly by the stakeholder group. Reconstruct the bottom gates and spillways. That was promoted by some watershed residents as a way to return the dam to the conditions that it was before it was rebuilt in 1982. And after looking into the issue, we identified that the dam is currently constructed in that way, and the sluice valve could be operated on a daily basis, but the only reason to do that would be to intentionally promote sediment transport downstream. We didn't see that as a viable option and not one that we would support. Dredging, you heard about dredging this morning. We removed this as a feasible option because of the logistic issues and the high cost of the project. The logistics include a lack of space for stockpiling or dewatering sediments, and disposal options for sediments with the low level of contaminants that they have are limited. Greg from our office estimated a cost of about $750,000 to dredge just 1 foot of accumulated sediment over the 35 acres that the county has. If you were to fully dredge the entire mill pond area to ensure that the accumulated material upstream didn't move back into that dredged area, the cost would come up to about just over $2 million. And this is after a drawdown has been completed. This is for a dry dredge. If you wanted to hydraulically dredge that area, the cost would be up to 3 times higher. We know that there are grant funding for projects of this scale is extremely limited and likely impossible for us to secure. The mill pond would still be an impoundment that traps sediment, and the result's not likely to be sustained over time. I drew a red box around the bottom two options. These were vetted as the two options that were feasible by the stakeholders group based on the information that we had collected. We have a full year drawdown, which we are calling an extended drawdown, and it's one of the preferred management options. The mechanism by which this works is compaction and exposure to oxygen, which promotes decomposition of the organic material that's accumulated in the sediments. You need a hard freeze in the winter to knock back the invasive plants like Eurasian water milfoil, and long dry spells in the summer to fully dry out the sediments, which will become almost like pavement and crack, which further allows oxygen to move down into the accumulated exposed sediments, providing additional decomposition. We had a recommendation from DNR to extend past 1 year to maximize those expected benefits and have the best chance of meeting those requirements. But I want to be careful and make sure that we set realistic expectations for what can be accomplished by a drawdown. The mill pond will still be an impoundment. We expect that we'll see some gains that will last a period of time, but it's absolutely true that this option is not a permanent solution. It's one that will provide some benefit. It's a way of managing the dam in order to provide some benefits, but it's not a full long-term solution. There is one preferred option that came out of the stakeholder group that is a long-term solution, and that's the removal of the dam and the return of the Anape River to an uninterrupted state. This is the most drastic option and one that can't be reversed. And we know that almost half of the watershed respondents to our survey opposed this option. If the only consideration was for the river system health, we would have this on the table. We would be talking about removing the dam. We have other factors that play into our decision making. The costs aren't fully known at the time, but could range from $425,000 and up. The positive side is that there are sources of funding that could help share in the cost if the county were able to locate the required match. So here's our recommendation. An extended drawdown beginning after November 1st of this year and refilling after 2 years. Why after November 1st? We are coordinating with the Department of Natural Resources, who is conducting a study in the Anape River and other rivers that drain into Lake Michigan along the eastern side of Wisconsin. It's called a total maximum daily load analysis, or a TMDL. If you haven't heard about it, you may hear about it in the future. But essentially, they're in a data collection phase right now where they're collecting information about the water conditions, and we want to make sure that whatever management action we take is after that time so that we don't impact any of their results. We plan follow-up monitoring to evaluate the success of the project. The considerations that went into making this recommendation are listed there. We had the public opinion survey that was completed as part of that update to the Lake Management Planning Grant. We knew we had strong opposition to dam removal, and 69% of the respondents disagreed strongly or disagreed with doing nothing. We know from the dam inspection in the fall of last year that the dam, with proper operation and maintenance, has an expected lifetime of up to 50 years. We had input from stakeholders and technical professionals that weighed into our decision-making process. We anticipate that we will see some benefits in water depth. Currently, we have 92% of the mill pond that has less than 3 feet of water. We also anticipate an increase in the abundance and diversity of the native plant community. We recognize that there could be an impact on fish. We're working with DNR for options for carp control during the drawdown. We know that they are the fish species that dominate the populations, the fish populations within the mill pond, and follow-up stocking for desired species would be preferred for game fish and panfish after the drawdown is completed. So frequently asked questions. I wasn't copied on all of the emails that you received, and so I've taken what I've heard during public comments and meetings and grouped them into 4 categories related to human health and safety, watershed sources, preference for other management options, and impacts on the Anape River. First, related to the fill site for the Southern Door Fire Department. Greg from our office is working with them to identify alternatives, such as creating a cistern at the first spillway of the dam. Blastomycosis. It is a rare fungal infection that is associated with intermittently moist conditions such as along river banks. And I've talked with Sue in the health department, and it could be a potential risk, but the best predictor of what kind of a risk is looking at the number of cases that we've had in the past. And we've had 3 cases reported in the last 10 years. That indicates that the risk is low. We will continue to work with the public health department as the project progresses, so that they can monitor and investigate any cases of reportable diseases that may be part of the project. Exposed sediments. People would need to take care around exposed sediments until they have dried out and solidified. Generally, there's between 1 and 2 feet of muck within the mill pond, and is probably more of a threat to people who are wading in the mill pond than it would be to those who may venture out onto the sediments that are exposed during the drawdown. Existing efforts to control watershed sources. Soil and Water has maintained very strong agricultural programs in the county for years. And we actively enforce an ordinance that has all of the state standards in it. We've worked with livestock operations in the watershed, and we have 88% of the cropland acres in that watershed covered under nutrient management plan. That's what the state requirement is, to have a nutrient management plan. We have 88% of the acres covered under that plan, and last year staff made offers of cost share to the remaining acres. We're going to continue to promote practices to reduce phosphorus and sediment loading in the watershed. TMDL, I mentioned that we're actively participating with DNR on additional plans to address non-point sources of phosphorus and sediment. We have a draft watershed plan and we're also assisting with development of the TMDL. But completion of the TMDL report opens the door to additional funding to address agricultural runoff, but it doesn't need to be complete before you can make a decision on management at the dam. Preference for other management options. One of the concerns is that dredging was not given enough consideration. We made our recommendation based off the data that we had in consultation with the resource professionals, all with the end goal of improving conditions in the mill pond. And we did not identify dredging as a feasible option based on the logistics and the costs related to that management option. Do nothing until watershed sources are controlled. This option doesn't deal with the sediments that are already in the mill pond and have accumulated behind the dam. It is impossible to control all upstream non-point sources in a watershed. River systems naturally carry sediment loads, and dams across them create impoundments that are sediment traps. No evidence that a drawdown will improve the mill pond. We do need to set realistic expectations about what improvements we'll see, and I did mention that already. But we've talked with DNR, someone who's worked on a project similar to these over a dozen times, and he has seen improvements in water depth and nuisance plant control. And so we're not experts on completing drawdowns, but we are working with those who are. Downstream impacts on the Anape River. This notion that we're just proposing to pull the plug and flush all of the contaminants downstream. We are proposing a controlled drawdown of the water levels in the mill pond. If we do move forward with this project, we would use DNR's recommended rate, which at this time would be 3 inches or less of lowering of the water levels per day. There could be some sedimentation downstream. Yes, there could. But we're working with those who have done similar projects like these to make sure that we're taking every action that we can to minimize those impacts. And the last one on the list there is contaminants. We do have detectable levels of heavy metals and oil and grease, but nothing that rises to the level that would be expected to cause adverse ecological effects. There are no point sources in the watershed that would be responsible for contributing a point source of contaminants. So we know that those levels that are in the sediments right now are from atmospheric deposition and watershed sources. And we would expect those same contaminants and sediments to be both upstream of the dam and downstream of the dam. So in conclusion, the recommendation we put before you is based on a number of factors. We have science that describes the current conditions in the mill pond, the process that we used and evaluated a range of management options, and I hope that I've given you some rationale behind the decision that we are putting in front of you in the form of a resolution today. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions? John?
I realize this is a hot button topic to discuss. I'm sorry, we don't want any comments from the background here while we speak, please. Just interrupts our thinking. Some of the comments made I appreciate from the public. I've received numerous calls, both at home and through email, which concerns me a lot. I'm glad the public is here today to express their viewpoints. Aaron, has there been, I don't believe there's been any look into what the actual cost would be for dredging?
Yes, we have looked into the cost both to complete a dry dredging, estimating just taking 1 foot of sediment off of the 35 acres that the county owns would be $750,000. To dry dredge the full 94 acres would be just over $2 million.
And where did who generated those cost estimates?
Soil and Water staff, Greg from our office, worked with John Kaloji to identify. He worked with John Kaloji to identify trucking costs and the notion that we can use county equipment and just take care of it with little expense is not true. And that's for a dry dredge, I should add.
Right. Were there any other estimates given by any private contractors other than the county?
We have estimates to hydraulically dredge a different water body, the Dunes Lake project that we've been working on. We know the costs associated with hydraulic dredging. And I should add that that has been funded through partners that we have, conservation groups that are interested in preserving a highly ecologically significant wetland, and the costs are much higher.
Regarding the sediments that may possibly flow downstream, I realize you estimate them, probably going to be low or not very high as far as the sediments that go. What do we do to stop any flowage of sediments going down? Or what can we do?
We can complete the drawdown in a controlled manner. So we're not just going to open the gate and just let her flood a flood that intentionally washes sediments downstream. By controlling the amount of water that's released in a carefully controlled way, we can reduce the amount of sediment that's going to move through. There will be some sedimentation as the channel cuts through, but completing the controlled drawdown will minimize those.
And is there, I'm sorry if I keep on rambling here, is there an urgency to start this project versus waiting a little bit longer for any possible further studies, or is this a final study that we would look into?
We are responding to public concern about conditions in the mill pond. I mentioned that Greg attended the Airport and Parks meeting in 2018, and we completed the study that we thought necessary to provide us with the information that we adequately characterizes the current conditions within the mill pond.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like just to add, we have probably one of the most unique Door County park system anywhere in this country. We pride ourselves in our parks and our recreation. I see no difference in the Forestville Dam. Its main purpose was for the mill, many years ago, which I wasn't around then, but we look at it today for the users of that facility, not only just as the local residents, but also tourism. I, for one, would like to see a nice park system remain down there, and I don't know that, in my mind, that this is the exact best way to go or not go. I wished I would have had more information a long time ago regarding a lot of the ins and outs, but I could not attend all the meetings. But it just, I guess in the back of my mind, I question whether or not we can do more than what's on the table today as an option. Thank you.
I'd really like to compliment Erin and the staff on the job they did, and especially her report today. I don't recall hardly anything that anybody brought up that she didn't have an answer to why we went one way or why we went the other way. Everything was very thoroughly done, and it boils down that this is the second chance the county's got. They tried it in '96, didn't do anything, and to do nothing, I think, would be a bigger mistake than trying at least doing this. And of course, the old saying is that you can satisfy some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't satisfy everybody all the time. And that's what the problem is here. And this is maybe our last chance before it really does turn downward.
Helen?
Just a couple of questions. I know a lot of people think that ag operations should pay for whatever is done. Is there any mechanism for that to happen?
I'm not aware of a mechanism by which we could make that happen, no.
Okay, so there's no money that would come from ag. Has there been any exploration of any other stakeholders or other groups that are concerned about the mill pond helping to pay for, say, if dredging was an option, was there any option of money being added to the pot by people that are concerned about the drawdown?
It had been brought up before. I think that if someone were to come forward with a donation of funding, we could look at how best to use that money.
Okay, thank you.
Linda?
The survey from June of 2017 reflected 47% of those surveyed opposed removal of the dam, correct?
Yes.
So here we are a year and a half later with just those two options. Has that percentage increased or decreased, knowing that the other option is a drawdown?
That's a good question that I can't answer.
Penny?
Just want to thank the Soil and Water Department for the work that they've done on this, and want to thank the public for bringing their questions and comments, which are a really useful way to vet more questions that come about as the process goes on. Feeling very fortunate to live in a very ecologically significant county, I want to also thank the Soil and Water Department for what that means. That means having a lot of responsibility for a lot of ecologically significant areas. And for the 40 parcels that surround the mill pond, I can see why the people who are in this area don't agree that this isn't of high importance. And I know that it is of high importance to them and to recreational users. But if you were looking at the big picture of the entire ecological needs and conservation needs in the county, you would see that this is not of the highest priority to spend tax dollars on. So especially considering that $2 million possible dredging cost, I can see why that's not on a high priority list for the Land Conservation Committee as well, which is why going to an option like this makes a lot more sense in the current time. Thank you. And I'd also, sorry, a little bit more, with 88% of the farmland and nutrient management in this area, this has had more conservation work done than most watersheds in the state of Wisconsin. And the CRP program, which installs buffers along agricultural fields, is a voluntary program that the Soil and Water Department works very hard to offer technical support and funding for. But they cannot require people to put in the buffers in these waterway areas. So work in that area comes from if a friends group or a group of neighbors in the watershed want to encourage more of that, just a reminder that it's voluntary and that is a community issue, not just a conservation soil and water department issue. I appreciate all the answers about the sedimentation release, the blastomycosis being addressed, and thank you.
Thank you. Megan?
Kind of building on, I believe, what Linda had asked, if there was a survey done today of those affected by the drawdown of the flowage, if there's the options of either do nothing versus the drawdown, I'm very curious as to what the public perception on that would be. And I'm sure it's just a question that's still out there, right? I am not confident, and while I know that our Soil and Water Department does do really great work and work closely with the ag folks in that area and throughout the county, I'm not confident that current regulations are stringent enough, even with the new nutrient requirement regulations. I don't think that those state requirements are really going to cut it in the long run, and that's how we ended up in the situation that we're in. I would like to see a little bit more information go into the possibilities of the county purchasing their own used wet dredging equipment. I had the opportunity to speak with a gentleman a couple days ago who has operated such equipment. There's used equipment available that could be purchased, possibly even with grant dollars if we took a look at what was out there, and then could be used in various projects throughout the county. Obviously, I know this would be to a great expense. However, I feel that it's either that versus taking a look at drawdown after drawdown after drawdown. So I'd be curious to see those numbers as well. Yeah, that's all I have for right now. Thanks for the work you've put in on it. It's a beautiful area. My first instinct, and I know this isn't popular with the folks of Forestville either, and I have expressed this in email form a few times. My first instinct is, in the long run, what's the most economically sound decision, as well as most environmentally sound decision. We don't very often get the opportunity to have that be the same thing. And I know that removal of the dam was taken off that list just for, it wasn't a popular option at the time, and that would have an adverse effect on the folks that have property around that area. So I will ask of the folks of Forestville, as we take a look at how to move forward with this, that again, as Supervisor Chompo stated, we do have a financial responsibility to the whole of Door County citizens, and that could be a viable option, in my opinion. So,
David?
Yes, I guess go back to 1992 when I first was elected to county board, and the Red River Sturgeon Bay watershed was just in the planning stage then. That was developed, and next in line was likely to be an Anape watershed. And the state changed their programs, and that possibility never occurred. So that kind of addresses what Dan said, there was nothing to be done. Well, we were looking then at the time of that study that Anape would be likely selected next, and that would include not just then Door County, but Kewaunee and any other tributaries that drain into that area. The state kind of went to a best management practices approach, and nutrient management became part of those contracts and so forth. At that time, I believe they were in either a 10-year contract or a 12-year contract. That's expanded to now that a piece of ground that goes into best management is for perpetuity if it stays in agriculture, which is a really broad approach. guess I'm talking about some of this because there's a question of how successful those programs have been. I'm sure without them, maybe it would have been worse. We were looking at a whole, if you looked at the 96 report, how many less farms there are today than there were then. Granted, others are much larger. But the approach was to everyone should have manure storage, and there was all kinds of debate on that at the time too, and all the other things that we've tried to control pollution with. But even today, we're looking at a grant for the Sugar Creek watershed to expand that because we still have phosphorus going into the Bay of Green Bay. I guess hearing some of the comments here and my experience with this is that we perhaps need to try to do more to control the sediment and the loaded soils with nutrients that are still getting to the Anape and to the pond. I think we need to take the opportunity to work more with the municipalities and people of Kewaunee County, because it's much bigger than just the pond alone that we're trying to address. We got a note from the Environmental Council saying, you know, perhaps the programs we haven't been as effective as what we've thought they might be. Even at the time of the 96 report, the department, Bill Schuster, recognized the change in agricultural in Southern Door and throughout the state, that as you take animal agriculture out of the picture, you're switching to the crops. It changes. There's perhaps more chance for runoff from that because you've got so many more acres being tilled. And those are things that I think the department really needs to work on a little bit closer. I appreciate Adam's comment this morning. I do represent him in the village of Namur. I guess one of the comments he made in his letter was he sees this as maybe doing as little as possible and see what happens. The costs of dredging and so many other things are very expensive, but when you look at another drawdown in 5 to 10 years, I don't know if we're doing as much as we need to try to partner and solve the problem. So after all that babbling, I guess I'm saying that I'd look at delaying this until more can be done with other communities and take a broader look at everything again.
I know when you look at things like sedimentation and decaying vegetation, any landlocked area that a pond, Little Lake, for instance, in my district, there's a lot of questions about how are we going to deal with the sediment, the bad plants that are in there. What are we going to do to correct that? So this isn't, anytime we have a situation like this, there have to be some sort of answers. And I agree, you know, dredging 2 acres at the dunes versus dredging even the 30-some acres that are county land, it will continue to fill in. Not all of it is necessarily agricultural. There are other areas, dammed up areas in the state that don't have agricultural runoff. Little Lake doesn't have agricultural runoff. It does have some lawns. There's other types of nutrients. Nitrogen isn't usually talked about, but that's very prevalent. So it's more than just agricultural runoff. In this case, it may be a primary one, but I think I agree with Dan over there that it is a larger issue. And I think that when I listen to everything that's been said and gone to the presentations that I've been able to listen to, I've done field trips with Aaron, I've done other talking with Greg and other people in Soil and Water, and they have to make some difficult decisions. They're not easy decisions. And I think when you look at the area, I don't think dredging is a viable option. I'm not sure that owning our own dredging equipment is really a viable option, and operating it is a viable option either. I think a drawdown is possibility, perhaps the drawdown with some dry dredging, if that is I know one of the things I heard is that even with the drawdown, if you compact 50%, so instead of 3 feet, you've got 6 feet of water, or 3 feet of, if you have 2 feet of sediment, you end up with 1 foot of sediment in the end. That maybe trying this and seeing what happens. I know it's not pleasant for the people living in that area. I'm fairly sure that there is not going to be more sediment, more pollutants beyond the bridge. I think we've worked really hard, people have worked very hard to try to contain that within the Mill Pond area. And I am in favor of the drawdown.
Susan?
I'm going to wander around here a little bit. I want to thank the people for sharing all of their thoughts in letters and emails and here today. And I recognize the emotion involved and how scary this is, and I totally sympathize with that. What upsets me a little bit and what I feel I need to share is that they're preaching to the choir. We all care about the agricultural runoff. And I'm not saying that everything the county has ever done has been perfect, or that everything Soil and Water has done has been perfect, but when you're a person who goes into conservation as a profession, you care about it, and you spend every single day of your working life working on it. As somebody who has lobbied for clean water and against agricultural runoff my entire adult life, I think that that's probably true of most of the people on this county board as well. And Door County, this is my observation from sitting in the cheap seats in the back and now as a county board member, they have been harder, or they have taken more aggressive measures than most counties. This is getting this whole agricultural thing handled is a way bigger issue, and it is not just a county issue, it is a state issue, perhaps it's even a federal issue. But the point is, it takes work every single day, and it takes all of us. And so what I want the public to know is we don't take this lightly. We do care about this. And in the consideration of this decision today, there are no good answers. Leaving it the way it is not a great answer. Drawing it down is not a great answer with problems. Taking the dam out is probably, as Megan and some others have pointed out, the easiest answer, but certainly not the most popular answer. So, I mean, I would point out there's been criticism of the board and the Soil and Water for not continuing or not taking those 2 points that were up there. One was increased educational efforts, and one was dealing with agricultural runoff. But they do that as part of their job. So they don't need to be the option that's picked. And so I guess what I'm saying is those things will continue to get worked on, but they're not quick solutions. We all have to keep doing that, and I mean everybody in the back as well as us. I guess I think that the best of these bad options, I guess, is the drawdown if people do want something to happen, because I don't see it happening any other way.
Thank you. John?
If I can toot my horn one more time here, I'd appreciate it. We spend a lot of money, through grants and donations, et cetera, improving our park systems. I don't know that we've looked into that for this particular area in Forestville. Are there any grants or anything like that available as other options to help, for a dredging project per se, or finding land closer where if we did dredge, it could be placed on that land to dry out and used for other things later? I realize, I look at our park system again along the lake and the bay, and we spend millions of dollars to preserve that. We spend millions of dollars through private donations to preserve lighthouses. I would just like to see a stronger effort in this, and I appreciate everything Soil and Water has done, Aaron, and the rest of the gang back there. Their efforts are well thought out and hard looked at, and they take their job with pride, and I do appreciate that with all sincerity. I just also appreciate the fact of listening to the citizens and their concerns. While they may not have all the answers, neither do I. I just think that, we can make money available for other things. I would like to see another option other than just the drawdown.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just
Aaron,
look-
I'd just like to,
Oh, sorry, no. go ahead.
Biz, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Biz.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Aaron, I'd like to just read a sentence out of the 1996 final Mill Pond report. It says here that a full year drawdown of the Mill Pond water levels based on predetermined cycle, that this management alternative would require permits from the DNR. But then when I look at the report today that we have on page 21, that second paragraph, it says that no permit or fee is required by the state or local agencies. I understand people change and rules and policies change over the years, but in 96 they required permits, and now you're saying we don't need a permit from the DNR to do this.
I can't answer for why it's listed in the 96 report, but I can tell you what we know about today. And I know Greg consulted with a couple of different people at DNR and identified that we do not need a permit. That doesn't mean because we don't need a permit to draw it down that we aren't consulting with them to identify the best way to complete it.
Okay, thank you.
Vinnie.
Just going to say, in addition to the cost of using a hydraulic dredger or a dry dredger to address 1/3 of the lake bottom, of the mill pond bottom, only addresses 1/3. So just to keep that in mind, dredging beyond that area is not part of the county park and is not, something that we've heard a cost estimate for it, but that's also another reason it's not a realistic option. And I feel that that is important to remember, and I feel that people on the county board and in the public should consider if the Soil and Water Department were to invest however much it would take to do that option, what other county projects would not happen? What other conservation projects would those funds be taken from unless they are raised in another format or in another way? How else would that staff time, which is already fairly taxed with conservation projects, how much of that time would be taken away towards this project? It is important to consider the whole picture of conservation in the county. Thank you.
Randy.
Hi. I was down at Highway Conference last week, and I had the opportunity to talk to a county board supervisor who was on their LCC committee, and I asked him if they had any feelings about the drawdown of the mill pond, and he said he had no concerns at all about anything coming down their way.
Okay, I just want to add just a couple points of reference too, just because Randy had brought them up. I did speak with the Kewaunee County Board Chairman. They did call. Obviously, they're getting a lot of calls in regards to the situation. He stated at this time that they don't have a formal opinion as a county board in terms of opposing the project, but I did offer that we've had very strong positive relations with both the board and other communities in Kewaunee, and we will continue to do such. So I did offer that we would, pending a decision, we could reach out and have meetings to help explain the project and move forward in that fashion. So I just wanted to at least convey that communication with the county. I think the thing that they're disappointed with is there's a lot of false information that's being supplied to the supervisors, and again, they're hoping that, as we've done in the past, I know even Aaron could follow up, but we have had communications, and I think we have strong relations with that, and I think in terms of making a decision, I think we can continue to do such. Just one thing in terms of the sediments too, just want to clarify as well, is that if you recall, it's still a dam, but if we get a storm event, whether it's just a small rain or if we get a larger storm event, you still have sediments coming down and you still have sediments going over the dam as well. Again, the dam is designed to hold things back, but I guess this picture that's been painted that this is the ultimate filter and nothing's going on beyond that is not true. you have to remember this is just part of a natural watershed as well, and you have sediments flowing over that dam as well. And also recall, I guess this is one thing I'm very proud of, is that the county has been very, very proactive. And as Vinny had pointed out, we have probably one of the higher percentages in terms of compliance within the watershed itself. And again, I know Kewaunee County is doing their work very much as well to do their due diligence. But again, I think you need to look at the amount of work that's been done within that watershed over that period of time. And I think part of that, we need to commend ourselves in terms of that effort. So I just wanted to point that out as well. The other item, just for the drawdown, I know we had asked the DNR rep to be here, but was not able to attend. But again, with the reasoning for the 2-year drawdown, is this really because of the overall benefits, both in terms of the compaction and also the, if I'm correct, the species in terms of the invasive species in terms of having those die off? If this is successful in terms of addressing some of those needs, the future drawdowns are not the same extent. In fact, the DNR representative had said that in a lot of those cases, you could actually do this over winter, and that would only be needed as a maintenance in terms of moving forward. So again, I think we need to put it in a context where it's not part of the proposal where you do a 2-year drawdown, wait 5 years, do another 2-year drawdown, and this is just an endless cycle of having this occur. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then this is the last item, just because I know both it was discussed both by Aaron, the DNR, and I believe it was the fisheries when they were there in terms of grant funding. Again, the biggest thing to remember is that this is considered an impoundment. And again, I would not say that it's not a beautiful area or not a valued area as far as Door County. But if you're looking at it in terms of grants, in terms of funding, that's the way they score it, and this is just the way it is they're looking at natural areas that also provide higher value. So when we say that we're expending funds to the north on that other pond, escapes my name right now.
Dunes Lake.
On Dunes Lake, there's the ecological value in terms of those granting agencies. There's no comparison because this, whatever what it's worth, is considered an impoundment. And that's entirely different to all those granting agencies. So while we can search those funds, I think it's very honest to say that getting funds in terms of grants from those types of environmental groups is much more difficult because when they see a project similar to Dunes Lake to the Mill Pond, there simply isn't a comparison because of the ecological value of those areas. So I just want to clarify those items.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Povich, for bringing those items up because I was going to, but you do it much more diplomatically than I would. I'm glad you addressed the misinformation. There's a lot of it. There are individuals I have spoken to numerous times. They don't want to listen to the facts. They don't want to listen to the soil and water people. They won't listen to the DNR. They just throw out the misinformation to get naive members of this board to side with them. And it's easy to do that because emotions take over. All right? The drawdown, going back to 5 to 10 years, Dave, that you brought up, again, what you said, if we do it and do it for the 2 years like the DNR suggests, will there be future drawdowns? Yes, but they will not be every 5 to 10 years, and they won't be 2 years in duration either. They'll be much shorter because we lay the groundwork by doing it correctly this time, all right? And as far as grants for dredging, what the DNR told us was, again, what you brought up, I think they told us at either the first or second stakeholder meeting we had, and the people that were there know it, the DNR is not going to give us money for dredging that pond. It's not going to happen. Yes, is this a tough decision? Yes. Does it get emotional? Yes. But the bottom line, we're sitting here, we have it, and we're tasked with doing what's right. And we were told, well, you got to talk to the experts. But that was after we talked to the experts. We talked to Soil and Water and the DNR. And short of taking the dam out, which I think nobody wants to do, even though it's the best thing to do, nobody wants it. The next best solution is a controlled drawdown over the winter, let it sit for 2 years, fill it back up. That's the best choice we have, or the best thing to do for everybody concerned. And I'm very much in favor of proceeding with the way it's designed here. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, go.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank members of the public that have come to meetings and to bring forward their thoughts and their passions and their information. This is a very difficult decision. It's not an easy solution, not a quick fix. I think we have to look at the big picture and recognize that this is an artificially created water body that, by its own nature, being so shallow, is always in the eutrophic range. It will even if the watershed was completely forested like it was 200 years ago, there is still sediment washing downstream. There is still nutrient load. This is such a shallow impoundment that it's always going to require maintenance. So if we want to keep the dam, then we have to accept the fact that there is regular maintenance. And so therein lies the, well, how do we do that? Again, I appreciate what Megan said, that it's very, very rare that we're able to do the right economic thing and the right environmental thing is the same choice. Removal of the dam and restoration of that of the basin back to natural vegetation is a great option. It could still be a great county park. It doesn't have to be flooded with water. But the study is done. The work has been put in. The experts have been consulted. People have had a chance to put their voice into that study, and this is our time to act or to not. What I'm a little bit confused is to know that over the years, people who have a care for the pond say, do something, do something, do something, do something, and now the county is doing something, but now you're not happy. So if we walk away from this, good luck, in a sense, and in that sense of, when are we going to come back to this again? It's like, this is our chance to do something. Now is the time. The study is done. We don't need more time to think about the study. I think we just have to make a decision here. Again, if we do nothing, it continues to be something that, there'll still be reasons for complaints, because then it's, filling up with even more vegetation. And then I also, I just want to remind everybody that just because we sit here, we have a certain amount of power and there's certain things that we can do, but the public has the power to hold the social permit, right? So one of the challenges with all of this is this sediment load that's coming from agriculture. Well, while that's an issue, again, this situation is always going to have sediment in it, even if there wasn't agriculture. So in a certain sense, we have to separate the ag issue from, what we're talking about. And in that sense, we've got all the information that says our department is doing the best they can with the regulations on the books. Can we do more? Yes, we think we can always do more. I think that part of that falls on the public to be more active in your community and get the social permit that these ag producers have, to feel like they can plow right up to the edge of a stream or remove the fence rows, or to be, put these monster machines on these lands that maybe shouldn't have it. Again, like, that's not what we're really deciding here today, but yet it is tied in. And that's something that the people can do, in that, again, in that idea of like a social permit. So the power is on both sides of this wall right here, but we need to make a decision today. Thank you.
Randy?
A quick question for Aaron. Is the CREP program something that could help control nutrient runoff?
Yes. The CREP program provides funding to install buffers along waterways or wetlands. There are certain eligibility requirements that are attached to it, and it is a voluntary program, but it is one that could be used in that area.
Megan?
Just looking for clarification on one thing. The reason that this came to a head in the first place is because the folks of Forestville wanted something done. Mitigation, is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
No? Well, if that were true, the point I was going to make is that what I'm hearing now is that the choice is to do nothing from the folks of Forestville. So clarification on that would be paramount, in my opinion. Because if the reason that it came out in the first place is because the people wanted something done, and this isn't what they want done, then there's no point in us going forward with it, regardless of the work that's gone into it. So I guess will remain confused on that.
Vinnie?
I'd like to address Supervisor Lundahl's comment. In the public meeting, there was at least one person in Forestville who did speak up that they did not like the water quality. And there also would address the letter from Brian Witt that states the low water levels, the silt and the muck and the invasive species is clogging the area around his dock and making it unuseful. So that letter was not in support of a drawdown, but it was also, in my mind, not in support of doing nothing. It was stating that there was clearly an issue that landowners were feeling was a problem. And I guess eutrophic bodies of water seem to have continual problems, and sedimentation gathering in those areas creates a perfect habitat for carp. Carp greatly stir up sediments, and in storm events, even with the dam in place now, that stirring up of sediments can easily release more sedimentation than what we're proposing here. So looking at the water ecology of a body of water has a big impact on a decision to do something or not do something as well. So thank you.
Anyone else? Joel?
Well, Megan kind of addressed my question that I had all along as being as far removed from this being up north. What was the major question or concern, excuse me, that precipitated this whole thing again? I know it's been an ongoing issue for decades, but what event happened in the last 6 months or 8 months or 10 months or a year that all of a sudden you guys hit the floor running again on trying to do something? Is it, I've yet to hear somebody tell me that question, or answer that question. What got it going again?
I got to answer it, and Greg can back me if I'm wrong, and Greg can come up and clarify, but ultimately it was our parks tour is what prompted it. So back in the, was it 2016 or 17, Greg? 16, we took the parks tour, and was one of the stops, and was discussed as one of the things, and it was discussed, Greg, if I'm correct, if I'm wrong, but they actually discussed the project from 96, and there was comments that were made in terms of that needing to be addressed, and that's what prompted the initial town meeting again in terms of looking at that issue, and that's where the survey was initially done, and that kind of kicked it off the process. So it was our parks tour that actually, when we stopped that site, we started to talk about it, but then there's also feedback from some of the residents. Again, some people in the back are saying, no, it wasn't brought up, but it was actually, it wasn't something that we just randomly brought up and say, hey, well, let's do all this project again. It was actually something that was done as part of the tour and feedback that we received from some of the residents, maybe not all, but that it be looked at and it be addressed.
Can I follow up to that?
Yes, you can.
So that's fine, that answered my question. The fact that that happened and now the county is put in the driver's seat to go forward to the committees, I mean, has there been, I mean, is there three-legged frogs growing and five-eyed fish growing in there? I mean, is there chemicals and runoff and nutrient stuff that is creating a problem? Because if there's not, then what is the problem with letting it sit as it is? I mean, I'm just asking, playing devil's advocate, because I don't know where I'm sitting on this yet. But if that's the case, I do know one thing about dredging. It's expensive, I get it. But if the issue is getting rid of the contaminants that are in there, the silt, the muck, the sand, blah, 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 then my personal opinion is draining it down and letting it sit isn't solving the problem entirely. It's prolonging a problem, and maybe I'm wrong. But I've seen what 130,000 cubic yards of dredging materials does when it sits. I know what it does. It grows stuff 5 feet again. So just by letting it compact, it's still gonna have stuff in it. And if I'm wrong, somebody tell me. But unless you get rid of it, the problem's gonna come right back again. And all I was doing is kicking the can down the road. So somebody needs to think long and hard. What is the long range 20, 30, 40-year vision for our kids when we're going here, when we're not sitting here? I don't know the answers, and I don't know if you guys have thought that far ahead. I hope you have. That's your jobs. And I respect that, and awesome that it's happening. But what are we ultimate goal to do this? I mean, I don't know. I'm
So if I could
unclear.
Didn't want to interrupt. So if I could take the, are there three-legged frogs and five-eyed fish or whatever combination? I'm not aware of that. No, that's not the driver. Remediating contaminated sediments is not the driver of the project. The conditions are such that there's accumulating sediment that are causing low water depths and nuisance aquatic vegetation in the form of Eurasian water milfoil. Those are the goals of the project, are to increase water depth and restore a more diverse and abundant native plant community. And there will be benefits, secondary benefits that come from that. But no, the intention is not to remediate contaminated sediments.
Kathy?
I was in the Parks Department, or committee, when we went on the tour. And when we had that meeting at Forestville Village Hall, there were more people present than in the back room right now. At that time, there was talk, most of the people that did talk were from Forestville or from that area. And there was talk at one time about getting a group of citizens together, similar to like you said on Dunes Lake, that there was whether it was an environmental group or who it was, that more or less contributed because there aren't the grants.
Sure, I'm a little bit at a disadvantage because I wasn't here in 2016.
Well, that's great. He was at that meeting.
But to get at your question, I think what you're asking is, could local residents step up and provide the funding if we are not able to secure grant funding for a specific management option? And that would be, that's something that could be on the table. But when it comes right down to it, weighing the options of dredging against a drawdown, I still come back to a drawdown because dredging is, again, only a short-term solution, and that would be a heavy investment of funds, whether it be from taxpayer funds through the county or through some other granting agency. That's a lot to invest in an impoundment that is going to continue to accumulate sediment. And that's as plain as I can say it.
Can I just have one comment? Sure. And then Aaron, you can back me on this, but Joel, to your question, I guess one thing to also clarify is that again, it's part of the natural environment. So if we have large storm events, I mean, some of it's naturally flushing, but again, the impoundment itself is acting as an impoundment. So it is filling up with sediment. So what you're starting to see, and again, it changes again because of storm events, but you're starting to see more sediment. You're starting to see it get shallower, and you're starting to see items related to algae blooms and other items related to that because, as Bob pointed out, it's a eutrophic environment in terms of that part of it. So, I mean, eventually, I don't know, unless you have significant storm events that continue to help flush out those sediments over the dam versus through the dam, at some point in time, either you're going to see it get so shallow where you're going to start to see other species as far as brush or other sediments grow or other species. So eventually something, like you said, what's the vision 30 years from now? At some point in time, yes, we're going to have to do at least some type of decision. This, I guess, in some ways, if we get it into a cycle of maintenance, again, relying on what the DNR had told us, at least gives us an opportunity to, I guess, extend that cycle of life in terms of that impoundment. Am I incorrect in that statement?
No, you're good.
Biz?
Well, the Dunes Lake is in my district, and I was on that committee when we did the study. First thing that you should know is there's not a dam there, so a drawdown was no option. But I hunted in there 30, 40 years ago, and the water was pretty deep, and they were dredging because it filled up with sediment. If there wasn't one drop of manure put on cropland, there's still going to be sediment that flows downstream. And it got to the point where there was hardly no water to even canoe in there. It all grew up in vegetation, cattails and stuff. So they did this dredging operation, which pumped the sediment a quarter of a mile away to a holding pit, and that has settled way down now. Where it was full to the top, if you went out there today, it looks like there's hardly nothing in there. So it does settle all down, but there's no homes around Dunes Lake and there's no dam, so it is no really good comparison with the mill pond. But the mill pond's going to fill up with sediment whether there's manure spread or not. And it's going to get shallower and shallower. Because the dam is holding it all back. And if something isn't done now, to make it settle so that you got the water, it's going to continue to get worse. I'm sure it's a lot worse now than it was back when this big study was done back in '96, and it's lengthy. Anyone wants to look at it, they can read through it. And I think they covered just about everything for, looking into all the different things. So I just wanted to, to mention that the Dunes Lake dredging and thing is completely different situation than the mill pond.
Yes, it is.
Can I just ask one last question? If there is, it's yes or no, I'm gonna ask it directly. There is or isn't any contaminated sediment in the mill pond?
Yes, there is contaminated sediment in the mill pond.
Okay, great. But it's not to the point where there's a concern? Because my ultimate question is this, I mean, I understand that the goal is to get rid of the sediment, and the mechanism you guys are deciding now is to do the spillover. But it was, no?
No, that's
To
not.
do the drawdown over the top?
So the way that the drawdown would occur
By pulling the valve?
is you would gradually lower the water levels so that the sediment that's there would be exposed, and it would remain exposed to oxygen. That would allow for bacterial decomposition of the organics that are held within the sediment. And by drying out, it compacts.
I
So
understand that. The drawdown's gonna happen by opening the valve at the bottom?
Yes,
The
a
sluice valve?
controlled. We're not going to
Yeah.
just open it and let it flow. It'll be a controlled rate at which the water is released. That allows for the water to come slowly through the sluice valve.
I know how it all works. But, so the end, what'll happen there then is all the stuff that's somewhat contaminated, but not really bad, is gonna flow down the river, down to Kewaunee County and out to Lake Michigan, right?
That's not what I'm saying.
No, but that's what will happen.
No,
Where's
that
it
will
gonna
not
stop?
happen.
It's a controlled drop.
It's controlled, but where's the,
Some still go, not.
I'm not a genius, but I know how currents and valves work. When you crack a valve, anything in the lake bed's gonna flush a toilet, there it goes. That's what's gonna happen, and my question is there a risk of that contaminating further down the river and getting down to Algoma and whatnot?
I'm not proposing that we
Okay.
flush it down the river. And I did say that there are members of the public who advocated that we reconstruct the dam to function in that manner, and that's not an option that we support. We don't see it as a viable option.
To be clear, and Joel, you and I talked about this, it's not flushing. It's not a toilet like you're trying to stir up here, and picture you're trying to paint. It's a slow, controlled drawdown. And when you draw it down slow, will there be some sediment that goes down? Well, of course. But there also will be a great deal of it, the vast majority will stay put because it's not a torrent pulling it down. It's a slow drawdown. So the majority of the sediment will stay right there, and then over the 2 years it's allowed to aerate, it will compact down. And the DNR has told us that will form not a concrete base, of course, but a very hard base that will hold up because there isn't ground or isn't water flow other than the regular channel of the stream or river. The outlying areas that is stagnant water, and it will not be agitated later on, at least not to the extent you're talking about. Or anyway, that's what it is. It's a slow drawdown and not a flushing.
Benny?
Aaron, I think you answered this already, but the inspection of the dam, the lifespan of the dam was 40 years?
With proper operation and maintenance, it's hard to put a specific number, but in that range.
Okay. And other communities across the state and the country, when their dams have met their lifespan, many of them have removed the dams because it's the best economical and ecological choice for the water system. That's kind of a scientific fact across the country. So if we're looking at long-term, I don't see why we would make a huge investment in dredging something that within maybe 40 years we probably will remove. or we will have to rebuild. So it's also another consideration for dollars spent, looking at the long term.
Anyone else?
One last question.
Go ahead, Bill.
Somebody explained to me the calculation numbers. How big is the valve on the bottom? 7 inches, foot, 3 feet?
3 feet.
2 feet. How much surface water and
3.
acreage or does it take to draw down an inch, and is enough even able to go out of this thing where you're gonna get a drawdown? I mean, have those numbers all been looked at and calculated by people way smarter than me?
People way smarter than me. Yes, we've looked at those numbers. We know that there's 3-foot diameter sluice valve.
In your other report, it says 2 feet.
Excuse me, no, please, no.
2 or 3 feet. There's a sluice valve.
I'm
We
just
have
asking
looked-
the question because somebody smarter than all of us knows how much water can go through a valve at a certain diameter versus huge areas draining down. I mean, if there's runoff coming in, can enough even be taken out to make up for what's getting added?
Yes, that is the purpose of the valve, is so that water levels can be lowered to do maintenance on the dam. We know that there's about, and I could get into the numbers, but I think suffice it to say that we have looked at the numbers, and we know that the dam is constructed in a way that we could complete a drawdown.
Did you have anything else, Dan?
Well, I was just going to say that a couple of years ago, I don't remember the time frame, we did draw the dam down 1 or 2 feet, so the valve is big enough to draw the mill pond down. That we know. Because we did it once, I can't remember how long ago, but 6, 7, 8 years ago.
Anyone else? Okay, if not, we have a motion and a second. This would be by voice vote, so please.
Mr. Chairman, I call for a roll call on the voter board.
Okay, that's fine. Be a roll call vote. Linda?
And this is, we're voting on the resolution, yes or no?
Yes,
As the
to approve the resolution
is
as presented. Joel?
Yes, I know.
Oh.
Think so. Big time, big time.
Don't say it again.
This could be a minute.
Take your time. Vote your conscience.
Gotta believe science.
There you go. That has passed, 15 yes, 4 no, 1 absent. We will take a 10-minute recess.